I'm going to give you a timeline, and I'm going to go really fast. Stay with me. This is really key here. So we're fighting the Cold War. Remember, the United States and Russia are fighting each other. We're each trying to control the world. Now, it all comes to home in Afghanistan, right here. The Russians decide, the Soviets decide, hey, we're going to move into Afghanistan. And the U.S. decides, no, we're not going to let you do that because we're going to fight you. But we're going to, now that you're in, we're going to do something else. So next slide. So the U.S. starts supporting the people who are fighting the Russians because the Russians have invaded, because they're now going to want to control it. The United States starts giving weapons to all these guys. See that guy right there? You know who that is? This is the White House. That's Ronald Reagan. That's the president. He brings all these guys in here who are these mujahideen, right? The mujahideen, right? The mujahideen are like the jihad. They're the fighters fighting for the jihad, fighting against the invaders of Islam, the invaders of Afghanistan. So these guys all come together, and the U.S. starts giving them weapons. The world isn't what we think it is. And the only way to understand what the world is to spend some time really examining it. So when those of us in whatever country we're in and whatever country we align ourselves with, when we stand behind our country and we say, we give our support to our country. We give our support to all the things that our country does. And when we give our support to all the things that our country does, sometimes it means a lot of things that we don't understand. Here, what it meant was we're going to give weapons to all these guys because they're fighting our enemy. Even though these guys right here are really some pretty bad people. Really bad people. We don't trust them. They don't trust us. They don't like us. They'd like to see the end of the United States. They'd like to see all sorts of things happen. They're really some bad people with bad ideas that we in no way support. However, they're fighting our enemy, and so we're going to support them. So they eventually take over in Afghanistan. The Russians leave, and they take over, and they become the Taliban. And the Taliban means student in Pashto. And the Taliban now take over inside of Afghanistan. Okay? And the Taliban go to the next slide. The ones that imposed a different kind of Afghanistan. No music, really took Islam and took the most arcane ideas out of Islam and created an entire thought system based on Islam, based on the Quran. So we go back to Afghanistan. So here's but nonetheless, you think about it, and I show you this photo, and that's who most of us are going to think about. They're going to think, oh, these are the Afghans, right? Here they are. Yeah, okay, a bunch of guys like this, right? And women who are covered and, that sort of thing, right? Okay. Let me say this about Islam real fast. So Gallup did this poll. It was very well done. The percentage of people, we did the U.S. and then we added up all the Muslim countries in the Middle East and North Africa, agree that using the military to target civilians is sometimes justified. Almost half of Americans say yes. 13% of all the Muslims in these regions say yes. So Muslims in this region are far more likely to say, no, you can't use the military. You never kill civilians. You don't kill civilians. You don't do that. But we can walk through the world with this idea that Muslims are violent, Muslims are at war, they're at war. Look, they're only at war in Afghanistan because these proxy armies kept giving them weapons and kept them at war. If it wasn't for us, they wouldn't be at war. In the Iraq War, for example, there was a calculation as to how many civilians could die to get the target that you really needed to get. Right? So if there was one bad guy, let's say in this back room here, we knew in this house, in this back room, there's a bad guy, and we really needed to get him. But there were civilians in there. And so we need to decide, like, well, is it okay to kill the civilian? Like, but how do you kill civilians? So we really got to get this bad guy, right? And the calculation as to how many civilians we could kill before we would say no, call the strike off, call it. We can't do that. The calculation was, it was 29. It was okay to kill 29 civilians. If it was calculated, estimated that we would kill 30 civilians, then we said no. How are we better? Who are we? Like, you really have to stop and look at this. Wait, what's this mean about these people? But you could say, yeah, but they kill. But we're not killing civilians. Well, we are. You're not. Most Muslims are not either. Some are killing civilians. So agree that individual attacks against civilians is never justified. In the U.S., it's 77%, and here it's 85%. These are Muslims in the Middle East and North Africa. The world isn't as we think it is. It's not how we think it is. It's not how I don't know how it is. It is how I think it is. It's very confusing. I'm right in my thinking about the world because I'm confused, and I think the world is confusing, and that makes me right because I don't know anything. I admit that I don't know anything, and so I'm right about not knowing anything because I mostly don't know anything. And wherever I travel, what I find are people that are just really complicated, including in the United States. It's a very complicated place. It's a cool place, and it's complicated, and like, oh, man. 90% of TV news stories about Christianity in the U.S. are about religious beliefs. 58% of TV news stories about Islam are about the militancy and violence. So of course we think they're violent, because this is all we're shown. Muslim attacks receive 449% more news stories. I just saw this. It just came out. I didn't put the citations at the bottom. I forgot, but more news stories. They receive more news stories than attacks by non-Muslim groups, including in the United States, including Christian groups. Well, I'll talk about that later, about all the Christian groups that are killing people around the world. But look at that. So of course we think Muslims are really violent. Of course, like, we don't know. Like, you don't know. When are you going to talk to somebody in Afghanistan? When are you going to sit down and have a conversation to ever find out what's really going on? Like, we're not. We don't do that. But that's what this is, right? That's what this class is. That's what I'm just trying to give you a sense that there's a whole world out there that's pretty awesome and that will confuse the hell out of you.